Thank you, and we're coming back out of executive session at approximately 7:30. And Sharon has joined us remotely at this time. And we will do a roll call attendance at this point just to cover our bases. Ms. Stout? Ms. Stout, can you turn your camera on, please? All right, we're going to move to Tina.
Present.
Betty.
Present.
Terry.
Present.
Meredith.
Present.
And the chair is present, and we will wait to see if Sharon can do her camera. Perfect.
I can't do it. The host has to do it. It's the host there that's
Sharon, can you just say present?
present.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Sharon, can you turn your camera on, please?
It says here that I cannot start the video because the host has stopped it. It won't let me turn it on unless who's ever doing it there turns it on.
All right, give us 1 second, Sharon. We'll figure that out for you. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sharon, you should be all set if you're giving a message to restart.
Start my video. You cannot start your video
you
because the
are.
host has stopped it.
You're there.
We see you.
We see you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sharon. All right, first item on the agenda under reports and, excuse me. At this time, if there's anyone here for public comment. Seeing none. First item on the agenda is reports and discussions. Treasurer's report presented by Mr. Paul Donlin. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to come up to the podium, just introduce yourself and your position, and then you got the show. I know.
I know.
It's going to be fun.
How you doing? I'm Paul Donlin. I'm your treasurer. I took over for Don McCure in August of 2021. I am a former selectman for the town of Abington for 2 terms. I worked as the treasurer collector, tax collector for both Abington and Situate. I retired from the business as the business manager for Situate Public Schools, and I met Michael. Michael was next door over in Cohasset. I currently am a bank director for the Abington Bank for the last 16 years. Personally, I married to Janice for 40-plus years. I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. 2 of my children are teachers, and the other is a nurse like her mother. I moved to the Cape over about 6 years ago from Abington, where I was raised and also raised my children. About this position is, I think Don was the very first treasurer you had, and with a combined regional school system. Typically, the Harwich Town Hall would take care of Harwich, and Chatham would take care of Chatham. But when you guys regionalize, you have to have a separation. So Michael can't sign the checks. Somebody has to come in and sign those checks. So what I do is basically take a look at all your cash and where your revenue is coming from, and the cash flow, and then as Michael has put forward to you guys, I think there's an investment policy that we're talking about now, and seeing as investments are probably, well, interest rates have gone up, as everybody knows, and so bank interest rates have gone up, but they didn't meet certain things that I was trying to look for the Monomoy School District. So first, when I first got here in August of 21, I observed interest rates weren't anything anyway, so it really didn't much matter where you had your money. But then as I kept listening to the bank things, I would go to our asset liability conferences every 3 months, and Fed's interest rates kept going up and up. I kept looking at T-bills, which is a very safe investment. I looked at your cash flow for the last 10 months prior to that, and approximately there's $950,000 that goes out every payroll. So that's about, it's 26 payrolls, that's about $25 million. There's about $650,000 that goes out once a month for 12 months for your benefits for what, Monomoy has to pay, plus the teachers and all your staff have to pay. So their benefits are taken out, employer, the shares. Then your general supplies, your electricity, your natural gas, your out-of-district placements is approximately about $550,000 per month for about another $6.5 million. And then we have bonds on the high school here for $1.9 million a year. And then we have Barnstable County retirement for $1.3 million. That's once a year that we pay. We don't pay for teachers, their retirement. They pay into it themselves, but MTRS is taken care of by the state. But you're paying for your cafeteria workers to Barnstable. You're paying for your aides, your teaching assistants, some of your administrative assistants typically are all in the Barnstable County retirement system. So you pay that once a year. If you pay it once, they can send you a bill for like 2 years, but if you pay it first in July 1, you get about a 2% discount. So this year we got about $24,000, $25,000. So then you have revenue coming in, and you're looking at this cash flow for the revenue coming in. Howard pays $27.3 million, but they pay it 7 times. So they pay $3.9 million 7 times. So what we do is we front load, so Howard pays first, so we can pay Barnstable County, and then Chatham pays in August. And theirs is $1.36 million times 7. And then they pay it, they rotate until June, then they both pay it in June, so we get the big payroll in June for the teachers that go out. They get 5 checks sometimes. Some of them do. Some of them we have to pull the money back in, but we have to have that money there to be able to pay them out for the next, 5-10 weeks that they're on vacation during the summer. And then we have state aid, and we get a transportation, we get transportation money back from the state for our transportation for these 2 regional schools do. And that's about, those 2 combined are about $4.6 million. And then we have grants, school choice, circuit breaker, IDEA. Those are the grants, a grant at about $2.3 million. Taking all that into account and taking at the cash flow, for the cash flow purposes, taking a look at that for the last 10 months, I went to Michael and to Scott probably around July, and I said, hey, we got some cash here because of ESSER, free cash that we had, and we had some school choice money that we had built up. I said, T-bills are really going to be up there. They're moving at the right time. So in August, we made a move, and we bought 1-year treasuries for probably, I bought $1 million for about 2.8, which in banks were paying 50 basis points. So we got 280 basis points. I like that. And then we did it again. And then they started creeping up again. We went to well over 400 basis points. They were up to 430 basis points. And we bought again. And then we started rolling some. So the bottom line is, I believe Michael put in somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 where he had this year, he had $15,000 worth of interest. So you're going to see in your draft budget, $200,000 plus in interest, and that's one of the main reasons why we did that, is to maximize and give you guys an opportunity to do something else with that. If you need to hire some teachers, or you need to backfill some teachers, or whatever you need to do. So that's what we did. We put together an investment policy, Michael and myself, that you guys have seen. I think somebody, Michael, you're going to be voting on that tonight. I wholeheartedly endorse that, seeing as I wrote some of it. And that's about what the treasurer, I do an awful lot of other things, but the main job this year was to try to get some money in for next year, because I asked Michael, do we want to go longer than 1 year? No. That would have been in next fiscal year, so he only had 15,000 in this year, so I kept rolling 3 months and rolled a couple 3 months T-bills, so that's going to be exceeded this year. And everybody's going to exceed this year because banks are catching up. They're over 100 basis points now. You can get a CD. That's the next thing once T-bills come down, because they're down below 400 basis points. They're probably around 3.7, 3.8, 380 basis points now for a 1 year CD. So now CDs are going, a 1 year T-bill. CDs are up over 4 for 11 months, 1 year. So we're going to take a look at that eventually and see if we can put some money into those. So that's the treasurer's report. I don't, if you get any questions or anything anybody wants to ask, I'll try to answer as much as I can.
Thank you very much. Does the board have any questions?
Yes.
Yep, Sharon?
Yes, there was one, all of this is great. I don't have the background you have, so I more or less followed it, but it sounded very, very good planning. I really appreciate that. The only question that was confusing to me is when you spoke about paying teachers in the summer, it sounded a little bit like we were paying them for their time off. Maybe you could just explain that a little bit tighter or something clearer?
I can explain it, sure.
Okay.
Teachers have the opportunity to either get paid within 21 paychecks or 26 paychecks, all back-end loaded, so they get 4 or 5 checks, or they could spread them all the way out through the summer. They're only getting paid for 182, 183 days, whatever you guys have there. It's just a matter of how many weeks they want to get paid.
Thank you so much. That's much, but I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Sharon. Any other questions from the board? Yes, Mr. Russell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
A request.
Sure.
I tried to follow you
Oh.
with the breakdown of gross amounts of monies. At some point through, Michael, could we have a breakdown on a one-sheeter of the highlights of what you just gave us tonight? That's beautiful.
You can
Now,
have
you're
it.
keeping one for yourself, right?
I have it on my laptop.
Perfect.
We will
Thank
make
you.
copies and give a copy to everyone on the
It's
board.
got my personal, stuff there too, but that's okay.
We will not make copies.
No, that's all right. No.
I get what you're saying.
What
Yep, you
I
got it.
already said.
You got it, absolutely.
Sure.
Thanks, Paul.
Soft copy, okay for everybody? Yeah, soft copy is fine, and we'll probably do an electronic copy for Sharon. All right, great. Any other questions? Good. It was nice to see you again. I haven't
All
seen
right.
you since, I
I
think, the
know.
hiring committee,
Oh,
but
that's right.
thank you for all your work. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Dr. Carpenter.
I just wanted to thank you, Paul, for the initiative, because I know the job is to go, make sure that the money's there to go, get the checks, checks written to monitor our cash flow. But I think the initiative to go find a way to creatively get interest revenue coming in when, when there wasn't a lot of interest, revenue to be had, I applaud that. One might say you more than paid for yourself this past year.
And I forgot to mention one other thing.
Yes.
I did, took another little job to help out Falmouth, 2 days a week also. So I'm working for you guys 2 days a week in Falmouth through the end of March. Scott and, Laurie Durer. Scott gave me a great recommendation. I'm going to go down there and help them out although I didn't realize it was tough to get from Dennis to
No
Falmouth.
direct way.
There's no direct way. That was not,
No.
my wife said, really?
I hope you drive a Prius.
Yes, I do. Not a Prius, Michael does.
Oh, okay. All right,
All right.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next item on the agenda, strategic plan update presented by Mark Smith. Oh, yes, thank you. I mean, I looked better that way, but.
Good evening. Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. So, as I've told the committee in the past, every time you all have Michael come up here too many times to present to you, I get jealous, so then I need to find a way to come up and present, so here I am. Strategic plan update for the 2022-2023 school year. And sort of themed this one bridging the gap, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So where did we leave off with the strategic plan? Last time we had some conversations around the strategic plan. As the committee might remember, the strategic plan had a timeline that took us through June of 2022. We had 4 major strategic objectives that we were working from, which I've highlighted the high-level strategic objectives there on the slide for you as a reminder. And the committee determined that we were going to focus on the Portrait of a Graduate work, which is ongoing. We're actually getting close to the conclusion of that. We had a meeting just last night, the development team, and that we would extend the current plan while that work was ongoing. So that's sort of where we've left off. So what does that mean to extend the current plan? Well, that meant this summer, and actually the work started a little bit before the summer, but the leadership team got hard to work at establishing some priority areas for focusing and continuing to move that work forward. And we had some 4 guiding questions that helped with that work. Those 4 guiding questions are listed there, but essentially it was looking at the strategic plan, and that was really some of the work that started prior to the summer, but what from the strategic plan had we really felt like we had accomplished and was ready to sort of be put to bed, and that was from previous reports that I presented to you and had really been checked, and boxes had been checked. What work was left undone and really didn't, stuff that was still needed to be ongoing. And again, a lot of that had been presented in previous reports. And then what parts of the plan did we feel were no longer relevant? The world has changed in 3 years. There was a rather significant event that happened during the course of our strategic plan that did alter the landscape of education. And plus, things just happen naturally that make some things maybe not relevant anymore. And what new challenges arose that needed to be addressed. And again, those would have happened regardless. But again, there was a pretty significant thing that happened in the timeline of our strategic plan that has presented a lot of new challenges for us, or maybe highlighted different aspects of our strategic objectives that we really needed to think about and think clearly about. So those were our guiding questions that we took with us into the summer. So with those questions in mind, we had a process that we followed, and that process started with as most of our processes do, with a deep data dive. And that data was collected from a wide variety of stakeholder pieces. So whether that was data that we collected from student surveys that we had done, actually your two committee members, the belonging survey that they created, whether it was family engagement surveys that we had run, it was achievement data, it was the task force, the equity task force had conducted survey data, it was observation and evaluation data, it was demographic data, it was budget analysis data. It was a slew of data that we put together, organized, and analyzed to prep ourselves before we got together as a leadership team heading into the summer, so that we had a wide perspective of different views on the district and where our areas of strength and weakness were, plus pulled together. We had been working on the strategic plan. I think I've mentioned the committee multiple times that throughout the course of the last several years, we've divided our leadership team meetings into focusing one of our leadership team meetings to be focused on what we call tactical meetings, which are really sort of like the business type things that need to get done. You sort of just checklist items that we need to get together in a leadership team and cover these types of things. And then the other meeting in the month is focused on moving the strategic plan forward. And so we also pulled all that work that we had done through those strategic meetings forward and summarized all that work and all the decisions that we had made and pulled all that information into these conversations. So that was all of our pre-work. That headed into the summer, and in the summer we had, so this is sort of how we framed our leadership retreat. We started with a conversation around and developed some shared learning and understanding around systems thinking, which 30-second primer basically just talks about how all the pieces of an organization are interdependent, right? So how all the decisions that we make are interconnected with each other, and how we have to think about it from an interconnected system. And as a leadership team, we needed to think about things in an interconnected way, and that we wanted to make sure whatever decisions we were going to make, we weren't going to make as individual, isolated pieces, that we really wanted to think about this from a systems perspective. So it was really just getting on board with that concept. And we then moved into, which we had done again as part of some of that pre-work, but really focusing in on our priority areas. And Dr. Carper's talked a little bit about some of this and some of the work that he's shared, or some of the conversations that he's shared in previous meetings. But we really honed in on, from pulling forward from the strategic plan, 3 big ideas. One was a focus on Tier 1 instruction. The second was a focus on SEL and mental health. And the third is a focus on equity, which again, you can see clear through lines from our strategic plan. It's again pulling forward the work that was essentially left undone and that needed further attention, going back to those guiding questions. So we didn't want to leave it there. One of the things that just as a point of information, I facilitate the retreats. And leading into the retreat, one of the things that the leadership team had really challenged me on was to make sure that coming out of the retreat, we really were action-oriented, that we really had some clear action steps that we were going to move forward with, that we didn't leave the end of the 4 days not really clear on a direction, and that we were really going to have some clear what's our next steps and how are we moving forward, and then moving and actually continue to move those things forward. So with that in mind, we framed once we had worked through and come clear on around our priority areas, we moved into developing a theory of action, which had 4 main components, which first establishing long-term outcomes, and then establishing what an inquiry focus was going to be around those long-term outcomes. And then we figured out, okay, so if this is where we want to be, we had to figure out where are we now relative where we want to be, and then what are some bold initiatives that we're going to put in place that are going to get us from here to there. And then once we had that larger framework, then we started to develop action steps. That's where we moved into action planning, and we started to establish clear action steps that would bring our theory to life, which then moved us into actually working the plan, which is where we are now. So we continued we continued to meet in that fashion that I mentioned, with one small tweak and adjustment. During the summer, we meet with our entire leadership team, which means we bring in the assistant principals into the group, we bring in the athletic director into the group. Joy joins those groups. During the school year, in the past, it's been hard to bring all those people together because we have to empty the buildings in order for us to meet, because we normally meet, like a 9 to 11 type of a meeting, and you can't empty all the buildings for all those people to get together to meet. But the group committed to wanting to continue to meet and carry this work forward. So your leadership team gets together at 6:30 before all the schools start to meet to carry this work forward once a month, because it was important enough for them all to be able to get together before everybody, so in order we could carry this work together without disrupting the work of the schools. So we continue to meet monthly to continue to carry the action steps forward. So what does that look like?
Mark, can we stop for
Oh, yeah,
1 second?
sorry, go ahead,
Ms. Tomasco, did you have a question? You were going like this to me. Oh. Okay, sorry. I'm like, I got you. Next slide. Waiting.
So, going back to those priority areas. So we established some vision statements that would help sort of define where it was we wanted to see ourselves in the next 5 or 10 years, depending upon the vision statement. I'm not going to read them to you, but each one is written there, which tries to establish clearly where we want to see ourselves. And again, going back to that original idea, which was taking the existing strategic plan and pushing it forward, right? So we're not deviating really substantially from anything that was standing in the current strategic plan, just moving forward ideas that were in the current strategic plan, but also thinking about where are we now, what has changed, what new needs might be in place, what have we seen arise, how, what has changed in the landscape of education, et cetera, to hone in on what might be some specific actions that would allow us to move those ideas forward. But again, tier 1 lines clearly with what we already had in our strategic objective 4. The SEL and mental health piece was clearly aligned with, I think it was our 3, if I remember correctly. The equity piece is clearly aligned with what was our strategic objectives 2 was our SEL, so 1 and 3 in our previous strategic plan. Or I guess it's still our strategic plan, but how we're moving it forward. Oops, I went the wrong way. So what did this is a snippet of it, but to sort of give you a visual of what this looked like. We did this in charts, and it was all, we were at the Chatham Community Center was great and hosted us. We had put us up in a little spot up in the room. So we did this all on chart paper, and then I put it into a Google Doc that we continue to work off of. But this is what it looks like now, right? So it was clear to us, or important to us, that we wanted to put it down on paper and articulate for each of these 3 areas what was our inquiry focus, establish where it is we are now, and then we came up for each one with 3 bold initiatives. And then what are the theory of action talks about, okay, so if we do this thing, then what will we see happen next? And if that happens, then what happens next? And if that happens, then what happens next? Until we get down to our long-term outcome, which Scott has shared, which is that all students in Monomoy will find success, and that demographics are no longer a predictor of that success. So come on, advance. And then we have to figure out, okay, so in order to get to those pieces, what are the actual actionable steps that we're going to take, and who's going to be responsible for those steps, and what's our timelines for those steps? So that was then, we worked on the following days, and we've continued to work on, as we've been working the steps, on those specific things. And so here's a snippet. Again, this document's much longer than what you're seeing on the actual screen, but I wanted to give you a sense of how it's continued to play out. That these, and again, this is a working document that we continue to work on as we meet as a leadership team, but this is then how it's played out on who, on the what's, on the really detailed levels of, and it's, again, it's a living Google document. We continue to add links as we add other documents, but this is us continuing to move that work forward in specific actionable steps each time we meet as a team with other agendas. You don't need all the grainy details, but they just give you a sense of what it looks like. With this, and again, I know Scott shared this with the committee already, but this long-term outcome, and we talked around this a lot. Do we have equity as a separate strategic objective? But we ultimately decided that we really wanted to have equity as a through line. That equity is really our success measure. That if we're ultimately having really strong Tier 1 instruction that's meeting the needs of all students, if we're really having a strong, comprehensive, integrated social, emotional, and mental health system that's meeting the needs of all students, then all students will feel like they belong in Monomoy, and and demographics will no longer be a predictor of success. So that equity becomes our measure of whether or not we are being successful. And quality Tier 1 instruction and effective integrated SEL metrics are a way to get to equity. And then as a sort of final layer, where does Portrait of a Graduate sit in all this? Portrait of a Graduate will be our way of helping us get a more well-rounded definition of that word success, right? So as a team, we had a lot of conversations around, well, when we say all demographics will no longer be a predictor of success, well, what does success look like? Because that's a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And Portrait of a Graduate will help us in defining success for a Monomoy student. So that's where Portrait of a Graduate layers into this conversation. Paul, you gotta get me to my question slide.
I'm just going to shut you down.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you very much,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Smith. Questions from the board? Ms. Games.
I'll ask one. So I'm curious with the strategic plan, I mean, MCAS is always lurking. So where does, in these conversations, how are you talking about MCAS? Is that part of what is success? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so, it's funny, we had this conversation, I'm pointing to Charles because Charles was there last night. So we had this conversation last night when we were having the Portrait of the Graduate conversation. Because Portrait of a Graduate, we've been having this conversation about the skills beyond academics, and academics continue to be a marker for success, right? So we don't lose sight of the importance that success around academics continue to make. And those are some of the conversations that we still need to solidify as a team as what specific academic markers do we want to use as the ones that we're going to determine for success. So is it going to be MCAS? And if so, at what particular, is it every grade, at every level, at every subject area? Or is it going to be specific levels in specific areas? And do we just use MCAS? Or now we have our MAP system from kindergarten through 10th grade. So do we layer that with, so for example, we had some conversations around, if we identify that reading is a critical skill, are we going to, as a district measure, are we going to focus, because we did some other reading as well and looked at other districts, and I know some large, big districts, but other districts focus, like third grade is a key, for reading proficiency is a key line. You know, eighth grade math is another key line. So like, do you put certain markers in place that you're going to use to measure, or do you just look at the whole thing comprehensively? And we need to internally still settle some of those discussions. But to answer your larger question, we are not going to lose sight of the academics, no.
Okay, and I appreciate that because, and you probably know this, there's a lot of conversation on the state level about removing MCAS. I mean, there's a whole lot going on, amongst the legislators. So I just wanted to hear from you that while certainly MCAS is important for now, I didn't want it to be the big thing, so so thank you for your answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, academics will continue to have some place, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to watch, in the near future, Mr. Birchfield and I will come and do a presentation to the committee about the evolving forms of AI and what that might mean for learning. I mean, we don't know the answers to any of these questions, but like what's going on in that space and what it might mean for the public education space and what it would mean for like assessment in like the big meta picture makes me just, so I think that's, I don't know, if I let myself go, I'll start riffing, so I'm going to stop riffing.
All right, yeah.
But-
And I appreciate it because I think one of the things I've heard for 20-something years is teaching to the test. So what I'm hearing you say is there's these other components, which is part of why people love coming to Monomoy.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? No, I think that's it. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Appreciated the update. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. Next item on the agenda, presented by Melissa McGuire, Preschool and Elementary Programs Report, and you will find a packet in your folder.
Good evening, Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'll wait for it to be in. So, as you know, I love videos of our munchkins, so we will start, because I feel like that always lifts us up as we're talking about them. So hopefully everyone's lifted now. Now we can talk about the serious stuff. So tonight I'm actually going to present on preschool and elementary programs because obviously our youngsters are moving through to our elementary programs. Purpose, again, for integrated preschool. Services are designed for young children 3 to 5 with disabilities, and that we are required to provide special education, early childhood programs, and that we're required to provide a free and appropriate public education for our youngsters 3 to 5 years of age. And the other piece of this is in that setting, we're required to provide 49% of the enrollment of special education and 51% of peers, or as we call them, our community friends. So our preschool program serves both Harwich and Chatham. And of course, as you recall, due to the decrease in enrollment in Chatham, we moved all of our preschool programs over to Harwich. And we provide them with a high-quality social, language, early academic experience that addresses their individual needs. And then we follow developmentally appropriate practices for our students. And that we also make sure that preschool children 3 to 4 who've been found eligible for special ed services due to disability learn alongside their more typically developing peers. And we have a morning and afternoon session, and I'll talk more about the specific sessions and our census. But I can't do any of this without thanking our staff. We have just an amazing, amazing preschool staff that supports our students as well as our related service providers. So that was really important that we thank them. And of course, everybody in the school, right? So But these folks working directly on the floor, getting dirty every day with our munchkins. So how does enrollment happen? So it happens a couple of different ways. One is our early intervention programs on the Cape and Islands provide us a referral list, typically 3 times a year. So what happens is it's very unpredictable because that list is based on students, well, not student, children's ages 0, meaning they've just been born, to 3 years of age, who may have been referred because they have a disability, whether it's developmental, whether it's speech and language, whether it's motor. There's a whole host of issues that they might be referred for, services through early intervention. So that list is very unpredictable, and because we only get it 2 to 3 times a year, it makes it hard for us to make, a full determination of how many students we'll have coming through our door. The next way we get referrals is through the caregivers, is through physicians who are basically letting parents know that, we're concerned about the developmental level of your child, so you should really call the school, and we then do an evaluation and determine whether they are eligible or not. We have screenings every Wednesday. Right now, we are fully booked for screenings for the next couple of months on our Wednesdays. And that's why our program actually runs Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesday, there are no preschool children because all day long is meetings and screenings. And we wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. So this is the state requirement in terms of how many students you can have enrolled in a classroom. So you can have certainly up to 12, with a maximum number of children on IEPs has to be less than 50%. So that was that 49-51% ratio that we were talking about. You can have 13 to 14 students with no more than 6 children, 15 with no more than 7 students that are receiving special ed services. And that's where we are at because it doesn't work for any of those other configurations, and especially the 16 to 20-year-olds. And if you notice, there's even less students you can service in a classroom if you have 16 to 20 kids in the classroom. So we're at the 15 mark, so we can have no more than 7 students in a classroom that's receiving services, which means we have 8 children that we must have for our peers. We're going to talk about that in a minute, because that requirement, if you're not able to meet it, you have to submit to the state a waiver. We are currently in that position. We are not able to maintain our peer ratios. We're short about 20 peers for our program, so we do have to submit a waiver. So currently, this is enrollment as of January 10th, where there were 6 parent referrals. Now, I'm saying that because this was after I wrote the report. So I had to throw some, like, oh my gosh, when I got the call, I'm saying, okay, all right, that's all right. We can manage this. But it kind of shows you that the reason I'm saying 6 parent referrals, that doesn't include the 9 referrals we have from EI right now. So the reason I'm saying that is because our concern has definitely been related to COVID during those years when children were born during COVID who were not identified, not provided services. And so now we're seeing a shift in our enrollment because they were never picked up. And so now the concern is coming to us more so than if they had received their early intervention services. But in terms of our numbers, I've broken it down a couple of different ways. One is the total enrollment in the sessions, the AM and PM sessions for our 3-year-olds, for our 4-year-olds, for our intensive program. And we've also had to put a projected additional session because we don't have room, we don't have seats in the AM or PM sessions in the 3-year-old room right now. So if you notice the total 7 in the AM, we only have 6 peers. Well, we need to have 8 peers. So as you can see as we go along, the peers are not matching up what we're required to have. Now we're trying really hard, and we have 5 peers that have come forward and applied, so we're excited about that, but it still doesn't meet the requirements that we have. I've also broken it down into the number of Harwich versus Chatham students in the preschool programs so that you can see in the past that we have really talked about, is it sustainable to have a preschool program in Chatham? So our numbers are quite large and requiring us to have another session open this month. And we're projecting right now 7 students just through February that are coming in. So we don't have our numbers from February to June. So we're a little concerned about what referral list will come through for the remainder of the school year. So this was actually an awesome graph that Michael did for me, because what we were looking at is all of our numbers are based primarily on our October 1st numbers. And that's great for a majority of our enrollment in the district, except for preschool, because preschool is turned 3 all year long. So that October 1 doesn't necessarily reflect the students that all of a sudden enrolled on October 2nd through March, which is our next data point that we'll receive. So Michael did a nice trend over the years of our October, March, and June enrollment. And if you look at the red line at the far right, that actually reflects our current referrals through February, not even getting to our March census yet. So we're right up there. So, we're hoping that that's not going to continue to trend beyond where we are able to, open up sessions for kids. So again, this kind of just really breaks down really clearly right now what our current programs are supporting in terms of our 3-year-olds. So we have 7 in each session, and again, we can only max at 7 students that receive services in a session. And then what we need, right? Because before the chart was showing what we had, but this is actually what we need, so that you can get a sense of how many students we should be servicing based on our students receiving special education. Our intensive program, and that number actually has changed as well, because we've had, since we did this number, because we've had other students that have qualified. So that program doesn't have peers because it's a sub-separate program where they're spending more than 75% of their session out of the inclusive environment, and they're developing those skills. But they do spend time in the inclusive classroom when they have mastered a skill or made progress with a skill to be with their peers. Whoops, sorry. So based on residency, I wanted to again just kind of highlight the number of students in each of the towns. So we have a total of 6 students from Chatham, and we have a total of 26 from Harwich in the 3- and 4-year-olds, and then the intensive program, all the students are from Harwich. So in terms of the number of sessions needed for September, so if we look at the number of 3-year-olds that we will have for September and the number of 4-year-olds, okay, we're going to need a total of 3 sessions for the 3-year-olds and 2 sessions for the intensive. And the 4-year-olds, we're going to need another 2 sessions. So a total of 4 classrooms altogether to support the number of sessions, which means 4 teachers for those classrooms. Now, also remember that this, again, does not include the students who will be referred from February to June, our enrollment over the summer. It is just our projections based on who we know for 3-year-olds, who stays in our 3- and 4-year-old programs for a couple of years, and our 3-year-olds moving into the 4-year-old program.
Ms. Henderson?
Just quick, do we have the physical space for that added classroom?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes. So what's really important, I've talked in the past about effectiveness and efficiency when we're providing education to our children, and to me that's really important. So looking at the ability to maintain appropriate levels of service, maintaining flexible grouping to best meet student needs. And this is really important because you're not just putting children in a preschool session, right? We are very careful in looking at the students' needs and making sure that there's a level of flexibility so that there's not, in other words, there's not a level of intensive all-in-one classroom where they're not necessarily getting all their needs met, but we can flexibly move them into different sessions to meet those needs. And also to be able to provide that intensive preschool program for our most vulnerable students who really need that explicit instruction and that support in a smaller environment. And then also our ability to conduct comprehensive evaluations and placement. All of these is what allows us to be effective in supporting and servicing our youngsters. And the efficiency piece of what we need to look at is the ability to coordinate services, especially with our related service providers, because they're not just providing services to our preschool, but they're providing services to our elementary school children as well. So we need to make sure there's a coordinated ability to do that. Looking for greater opportunities to group students, greater inclusion opportunities, and the ability for professional learning communities and shared resources. So with that, as we look at our growing numbers, and the question that you asked us last year and that we responded to was, is there the ability to have a preschool program in Chatham? And so I want to just walk through some configurations and then talk about what is, again, best for our students. So configuration one is remaining at Harwich Elementary, that all of our preschool children receive their services and education at Harwich Elementary, which would include the sessions that we just spoke about. And that new 3-year-old classroom would give it flexibility for the incoming students that we are unaware of at the moment to be able to add that second session. So it's giving us a really nice buffer without having to scramble to add that second session with that teacher that we need to put in place. So this is the configuration where if you were to look at having a preschool in Chatham, we're back to actually the same conversation and the same census as we talked about last year, which worries me because you're having to now force place children in a session, right? So we have 4 3-year-olds and 2 in one session and 2 in a second session, okay? And the need for community friends, right? So 2 children in one session doesn't, to me, it doesn't give them the opportunities, the educational opportunities, the growth, the inclusion opportunities, and nor does it with 4 children. And so this has always been my concern, is how do we really ensure the effectiveness and the efficiency of meeting those unique needs? It doesn't. It just forces them into a session that may not be appropriate for their developmental needs. Now, the other configuration you could certainly look at is you could have a combined 3- and 4-year-old mixed classroom, and that concerns me even more, because part of that is when you think about the students that are coming into our programs, 2.9 years of age, okay, is really what we start to bring students in at, and then they leave at almost 5. That is a significant developmental gap to have 3- and 4-year-olds together, right? Not knowing what end of that age they're on. Now, have we had our 3-year-olds enrolled in our 4-year-old session? Absolutely, because they're turning 4, right? So they might be turning 4 in January, February, March, so that might make sense developmentally. So, and that's when I go back to that flexible grouping, that developmentally they're actually ready for that, and that's okay. But a 2.9-year-old and an almost 5-year-old in this configuration, in my opinion, does not service our children. Okay, so I'm just going to move to the elementary. Oh, you want me to do it? I can do it. And we can't forget our elementary munchkins at Chatham and Harwich. I think I mixed my preschool. I think I mixed my preschool with my elementary.
Good jam.
It is a good jam. Yeah, I'm so sad. Well, the first.
They're still cute,
picture.
I
They
know.
are cute, I know. How can you not love it?
You can't cut them off.
I know, but we are. I had a little bit of fun with the elementary kids, and well, sorry about that. I do like the beat, though. So the reason I'm moving right into elementary, because I really, at the end, want to talk about what does it look like preschool, what does it look like at elementary. So that's why I'm pausing a bit on preschool and moving into our specialized programs. Oh, I didn't know I could do that.
And again.
I didn't know I could do that. How do I stop? I didn't even know I could do that. That was kind of cool, now that I know I can do that.
My watch likes that I'm getting activity
Oh, can you
points.
just hit the arrow down button?
I really have it set.
Oh, there it is. All right, so at Harwich Elementary, we have two programs that support students that have unique needs. One is our surf program, and one is our ISLE program. Our ISLE program is grades 1 through 4. Now, we also have an ISLE pre-K, okay? So that's, I don't have the picture of them on that, but there's a pre-K ISLE, which was that new program, intensive classroom we opened. So our ISLE program 1 through 4 is was originally designed for students on the autism spectrum, okay? They spend up towards 75 and perhaps all day in the classroom based on their needs. And right now, there's 11 students, and then we just had one student that has moved into our community, so they will also be part of that program. And then our SURF program was really meant to support students who are having social, emotional, and some behavioral challenges, and being able to provide them with a space that gives them the opportunity to learn those skills, to help them better navigate and manage their emotions, and to be able to work more effectively in their learning environment. There are currently 8 students in that program. And again, have to thank these fabulous, amazing staff that are working in both of those programs to support our students. And then we get to Chatham. So a few years ago, we had a program called SEAL. And of course, as the enrollment kind of slowed down there, and we didn't have students with intensive special needs, we no longer had a SEAL program. And of course, because students were going to Harwich for their pre-K experience, they were able to also move into either our ISLE program or to receive services through our SURF program. So what we're really looking at is the need for a program for students that have some cognitive disabilities that require more than 50% of their day with a teacher to get explicit instruction. And we're looking at the numbers currently over at Chatham Elementary, and again, they're students from preschool that went to Chatham for their K experience, but now what we're seeing is an increase in significant disabilities. So we're projecting right now there are 6 students currently at Chatham that will need that program. We have the resources at the school to have that program, but we're also thinking about, as we look at our programs, is making sure that, we look at having programs in both schools that effectively support students with their unique needs. Similar to having the preschool at Harwich, having a program that supports these students, because they wouldn't fit in with necessarily the ISLE program, because that truly was designed for students on the autism spectrum. So our other students have different needs, and you teach them differently, right? They have unique needs that need to have a specialized program. So for next year, we're looking actually at approximately 8 students for that program at Chatham, and the year after that, 12. And again, that's looking at those 6 Chatham students in our pre-K program and their unique needs, and how are we going to service them when they do get to Chatham Elementary. So what's really important is thinking about 2 things. One is our preschool program and being able to answer your questions about having preschool at Chatham, but more so thinking about what is best for our students, what is best for our children. So if we know that we have an increase in the needs and the uniqueness of those needs, how can we make sure in both of our communities we can provide that service? So really, the biggest recommendations I have is that we maintain the preschool at Harwich Elementary to meet those unique needs, to maintain our levels of efficiency and effectiveness, our levels of service, all of the things we talked about, but then to have this program at SEAL that also services Harwich and Chatham, so that students who have a more complex need, who may be from Harwich, can go to this program and have their needs met. So those are the 2 main recommendations that I'd like to put forth so that we truly are meeting our students' needs. And with that, happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Melissa. I will open for questions. Ms. Games?
Yeah, Melissa, I think if I remember correctly, the question that was asked by one of our Chatham colleagues last year about Chatham, I think if I understood her question correctly, it was more about, would it be possible to take what we're doing in Harwich and just move the whole thing to Chatham? I believe that's where she was going with that question. And then I also see on page 12, it says there are no configurations that include, because parents have put right or stay put rights to a placement. So I think that was her question.
So let me explain that, because that's a great question. So what happens when you have a student who needs special ed services? Part of what you consent to as a parent is the placement itself. So when we're offering that placement and the parent consents, we actually can't take that placement away. So I could not move Harwich children to Chatham, okay, because a parent could say, no, thank you. The reason we were able to move Chatham to Harwich is because there wasn't a program. So the placement is based on where the program is. That's not stay put because there isn't any program there. So that's where there's also a large concern. When you don't have a program, you can't just move kids. So, and that's why when we were brainstorming about how do we service all of our children, really looking at that SEAL program, because right now we have students that are in the ISLE program. I know there are a lot of acronyms and I apologize, but that probably needs something different. But that's the only program we have. And we didn't have enough students to say, you know what, we really need this program, and now's an opportunity to provide that uniqueness and service and have equity across 2 towns to provide services to our most vulnerable children. So does that answer it?
I think so. That was what I remembered her question to be, and, she's not here tonight, but I just wanted to get clarification why you were there.
So, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
So because we don't have enough students, because we don't offer the ISLE program in Chatham, the stay put doesn't apply.
Correct. So if they needed that, the placement would be Harwich.
Right.
Or if you were in Harwich and the SEAL
You
program.
needed SEAL's only
that's
available in
the-
Chatham, and there's no stay. Right.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Dr. Carpenter?
I think last year, we were having the exact same presentation, and the exact same conversation, and what we were saying and what Melissa's doing again is there's really not a viable number of Chatham preschoolers to have the preschool program run in Chatham with enough peers to support a quality environment. So have the program at Harwich Elementary. Just like last year, we still remain committed to having a program at Chatham as soon as there's enough students. But just like when we were projecting out last year for this year, there weren't enough. We're still, there's just the 6 students for that need those preschool special needs services. So have them at Chatham Elementary. But we also are recognizing that we need to make sure that we're having equity, because the way the regional agreement is now is that there's Harwich and Chatham, and they're paying for their own elementary schools, so that there is equity, that there is a different special needs program that is being housed at Chatham Elementary School. So fiscally, this is a wash, but what it's doing is it's creating centers where we can give students the best supports that they need. Just one of them is going to be housed at Chatham Elementary School, and the preschool at Harwich Elementary.
Yeah, and I think if you don't mind, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think I understand.
No, I don't.
I think I understand what you're saying is because we have many more Harwich students, it makes sense to base them there, right? So I think what her question, if I'm remembering correctly, was more of a fiscal one. Let's just pick the whole program up and bring it over, and that might help budget, is kind of where I think she was going with it. But you've just helped me understand why that's not possible. So that's I think what I was trying to get clear on.
And I don't think it was all fiscal. I think some of it was, just for argument's sake, why do the 5 Chatham kids have to move? why can't we move the 30 or whatever number it is Harwich kids to Chatham, where we have this space and availability and this quote, building that's gonna be vacant soon, like, why not take this program and like have a really huge pre-K program with, I think that was also probably
Right, I
where
think
she
it
was
was,
coming
yeah.
from, yeah.
Yeah.
Ms. Henderson?
I know there's always staffing issues finding people. Have we found someone for the January? Okay,
We have,
okay. And
as of yesterday.
yes.
And we will be setting up the classroom next week because our munchkins are walking in a week.
Wow. Okay. And then the SEAL program is completely new, so you'll be hiring for that?
Actually, no, and of course, I know we'll be doing our budgets, and I'm actually going to be doing a full special ed budget presentation, but we do have a teacher that's a .5 at Chatham already.
Oh.
Yeah, and amazing, and is able to fill that.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Great, any other questions? All right, let's hear from Sharon. All right, great, thank you, Melissa. All right, next item on the agenda is actually the housing partnership, which Jess was going to share with us this evening, but she is not here. And Tina, I don't think you had anything on that either, but, oh, Dr. Carpenter might.
Well, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I have something related to it on housing.
I would probably, well, maybe we'll save that if you've got it in your superintendent's report.
I hadn't planned for the housing partnership conversation.
Oh, were you presenting for Jess?
No, it's just an announcement that's related to.
That's fine, announcement's great.
So there was a meeting this week with regard to housing for the town of Harwich. And there is a plan for February 1st, I believe it's going to be 8:30 in the morning, a Harwich housing huddle. But it is a parallel conversation that is, that's going on in Harwich. And I know Jess, I think, was talking with maybe more of a Chatham lens, but the conversation is happening at Harwich and across the Cape.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, can I make just a comment? Just because for people that are viewing that may not be aware of the housing situation, we don't need to have discussion. Can I just make a comment about why we care about housing? But if not, that's fine.
I would err on the side of caution on that one, just
Okay.
because, yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure.
But we can certainly include it on the next agenda if we have an update on housing and the housing crisis and such. If we have that, we can do that. I feel more comfortable with that, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, next item is just the updated 2022-2023 subcommittee assignments. And this was just, we did have a small correction at our last meeting, and I shared my notes, and I believe we updated the Select Board and Finance Committee's column, Regional Agreement Working Group, were the two that needed.
Strategic plans.
Oh, yeah, excuse me, in the Strategic Plan Steering Subcommittee, we are just down to 2. So if anybody has any other corrections they need to make, this would be the final copy. Hopefully everyone's going to their meetings. Good? All right, great. All right, next item on the agenda is votes required also for the annual approval of student activity funds. Michael?
All right, good evening, school committee. Michael McMillan, school business manager. So, as you may remember, the school district has special accounts set up to look after the funds related to student activities. So these are funds which are, under the law, the students' funds, so like for running clubs, field trips, those sorts of events. We have special student activity accounts, they're called, and it's us looking after the students' money. And there's a bunch of legal regulation, law and regulations ensuring that those are properly looked after. So one of the recommendations from the state is that we come once a year and just get your ongoing approval for the list of student activities. And so I provided that in the handout. So you'll see there's a long list of student activities. It should look like this.
Look at them go.
Yeah, so we've added, with your approval, earlier this year, we added a class of 2027 and international field trips. We also added robotics. Those are also listed. And we've listed in here the objective and how they're raising funds. So any questions?
Ms. Gaines?
Yeah, just a really quick question. On the page that you provided, the accounts that were set up, so you list the classes, and it says now have zero balances and can be closed. So they're just now coming into zero balances?
Some of those, yeah. So sometimes when a class graduates and they have funds remaining, in order for us to give them those funds, they have to set up a bank account in the name of the class. And so sometimes it's the class treasurer that will do that, and they'll set up, and it just sometimes takes them a long time to set up that bank account, provide us the information, and then for us to be able to write them a check.
Oh, okay. So like they can use it for a reunion or something? Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
got it.
And at the end of the day, it's their money, so they can use it for
Okay.
whatever they like.
All right.
Thank you for the adage, Michael.
Yeah.
Ms. Henderson?
May I make a motion?
You may.
I would like to move to approve the Monomoy Regional School District's existing student activities as listed in the document provided, and to approve that the following activity accounts be closed: the Monomoy Regional High School Class of 2016, the Monomoy Regional High School Class of 2017, Monomoy Regional High School Class of 2021, Monomoy Regional High School Class of 2022, Monomoy Regional Middle School Band, and the Monomoy Regional Middle School Art accounts.
And is there a second?
I would second that.
And any questions or discussion? And we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Stout? Sharon, you're on mute.
Aye.
Great. Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Ms. Gray? Aye. Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And Chair is an aye. Great, thank you. And ironically, next item on the agenda is the FY24 draft budget, which you will find in your packet. We will be voting on the draft budget this evening by roll call. It's almost like I saw it this week already. It's a little chilly. Geez, Michael, you think you'd come prepared? You've had all this time. Gosh, it's like your first time.
Madam Chair.
Down arrow once, Michael, on the computer.
It's because Mark's here.
Just hit the down once and then it'll pick it up.
Mark presented and just
Yes.
jinxed you. I know, yours was like efficient. Graphics.
None of it's working.
Oh, he broke
Here we
it.
go. All right, here we go. All right, okay. So, good evening, Michael McMillan, Skill Builds, for now, Business
Shut up.
Manager, a Monomoy Regional School District. So, I just wanted to, so where we are in the budget process. So, we started development, we sent you a early draft before Christmas, and under the regional agreement, we have to provide a draft copy of the budget to the towns by January 15th. So we're here today to seek your approval of this draft budget. And then we provide that, and then actually it does say in the regional agreement that then there is the expectation that there's further discussion amongst the committee, as well as when we go and present this draft budget to the towns, and there will be further discussion, and the budget and the assessments may change before we vote a final draft of the budget in March, when we will get the numbers from the state, which will influence the assessments. So we're just at the kind of approving the first draft of the budget.
We might want to also point out that with the change in the regional agreement,
Oh, I'm sorry, I
we
didn't do
also
that.
had to hold a
Yes.
finance subcommittee meeting where there was a vote that took place with regard to the draft budget before we brought it here.
Just what the superintendent said. So because one of the requirements in the new regional agreement is, and that didn't used to have to happen, so we had to have this, a school committee, a finance subcommittee vote to approve the budget before it came here. All right, and here's So here's if you remember nothing else from a presentation, this is the one slide to remember. So where student needs are, so we are seeing, partly from COVID, I think COVID has caused, but I think it also accelerated some trends we were already seeing, an increase in student needs in a number of areas, not least academic intervention required from the disruption that COVID caused, but also there's a need for broader social and emotional learning supports. And we are also seeing, as our special education director pointed out, we are also seeing an increase in demand for special education resources at some levels. So we're seeing a lot of, although we talk about our enrollment, and enrollment is kind of level or dipping slightly, but the needs of our students is growing. And that impacts our budget and the resources that we need to meet those student needs. And at the same time, we are seeing a lot of financial pressures, as I'm sure people are at home. We're seeing our utilities are increasing because of inflation. Supplies are increasing, the costs are increasing, and that is impacting our budget. Transportation costs and like HVAC maintenance, those things are being impacted by inflation, by a really tight labor market, by supply shortages. So all of those things are also putting a lot of pressure on our budget. There are some, from a financial perspective, there are some glimmers of light as well, and I will go into those that are helping us keep the budget where it is, which is just a 3.6% increase, coming in at just over $44.3 million. And that translates through the process, which I'll explain over the next 20 or so slides, that translates to an increase of over $1 million for Harwich at 3.8% and just $157,000 for Chatham. So that's a high-level summary, and I'm just going to explain this for the next couple of hours. Yeah.
I thought you almost said 20 minutes, and you said 20 slides, and I was like, phew.
I'll do it. We can do it. All right, so the first thing is, so I'm going to take us through 3 steps. The first is how much we plan to spend in FY24, what revenue is then available to offset that expenditure, and then step 3 is how we calculate the assessments for the towns. All right, first, our planned expenditure. So I'll skip over this stuff. We've talked about this before. Our budget development principles, not least our 5-year projections, which we discussed just before Christmas. So some of the key budget assumptions, I should say FY24 budget assumptions. So we're assuming right now an 8% increase in our health insurance costs, which is about $300,000. Those rates should be set in early February. Likewise, we are assuming that our school choice and charter student numbers will remain consistent. And that's also critical because we've seen, particularly with school choice, a reduction. So we are assuming that reduction will continue into FY24. We're assuming our stable enrollment right now with what we have, including the increase we've seen in pre-K, we're assuming that increase will be there, but we're not assuming continuing to increase. And, like I mentioned, we're assuming that our incoming and existing students continue to need those additional supports that we've talked about. And so there's the budget, $44 million, $323,116 million. That's an increase of $1.5 million from last year at 3.6%. And that's actually slightly less, I think, than the increase we envisaged at this time last year. In the end, the increase actually ended up being a little less. So this is another really it's a big table, but I wanted to just capture all the things that are influencing that $1.5 million increase. And really, so you can really see the magnitude of each of these items has, the magnitude of the impact each of these items has on the budget. So salary increases, our budget is 80% of our budget is salary related. So the increase in the contracts, that's the major part of our budget increase. Health insurance, like I talked about, the 2 new curriculum positions that we're hoping to add. As I mentioned, utilities, our gas and electricity. So we do have contracts for those. However, so that's just for the supply, but the delivery, which is on from National Grid and Eversource, that is not protected by a contract. And so we are seeing a lot of cost increases in utilities. We have the additional special education program staff that are necessary in the elementary schools. Transportation costs are up because of, a bunch of reasons. Inflation is putting pressure, on our supplies, for gas, for salaries, because it was proving very difficult to recruit bus drivers. So the vendor that we use to provide our transportation services has increased salaries. And so that's all leading to that increase in that service. Out of district, which is when we send students who are not able to educate in the district, we pay for them to be taught in private or public institutions, and we pay for those, and we're seeing a big increase in those costs. Again, it comes back to that same thing. I'm like a broken record. It's inflation, it's a really tight labour market, and that's all impacting the costs of the schools providing special education services, as it does impact us. And it does say, just so you're aware, it says net change. That's because our out-of-district tuition is offset by a major reimbursement we receive from the state, which is called Circuit Breaker, and they provide funding to us to offset the cost of high special education costs. And we are budgeting more of that than we did last year. So despite that increase in the reimbursement to offset our costs, we're still overall, even once that's taken into account, we're seeing an increase over $100,000. Maintenance of equipment is really, that's the HVAC equipment that's here at the high school. That's, again, there's labour market shortage. Also, the most sophisticated building we have is here at the high school, and so we have way more equipment here than at any of our other schools. And it's now getting on for 9-10 years, and so the cost of just maintaining those and keeping them running, the amount of repairs has unfortunately started to increase. So, and it's just bad timing with everything else that's going on in the market. Our retirement contributions continues to go up. Property insurance, again, like you see at home, we are on the Cape. We are subject to big increases in property insurance. And then the last two things I wanted to highlight here is that big reduction there at the bottom for school choice tuition. So that's the number of students who live in Harwich or Chatham but choose to go to public schools other than Monomoy. So that's like if they're going to DY or if they're going to Nauset, then the state charges us a fee to help to fund those schools for those students, normally around $5,000 per student. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a substantial decrease in the number of those students. And so the state is charging us much less for students leaving Monomoy. So that's a great news story for us, and that's really helping to offset those increases that you see in the top 3/4 of that table. Staffing turnover. So we are seeing a lot of staff leave. I think some of the conversations we've had, we see a lot of turnover of staff, and often when the staff leave, they're more experienced because they're retiring, and so they're leaving at the top of the scale, and they're replaced not necessarily by brand new teachers at the bottom scale, but in the bottom half of the scale. And just that difference has delivered us some $253,000 of savings. So again, that's been a huge help to offset some of the other salary increases. And I think that's more than normal, because I think we've seen higher turnover in the last year or so than we normally see. And again, it's partly due to COVID. So as I'm talking, I realize I'm throwing so much information at you. So is there any questions about anything that I've just gone through on that slide?
I can't see Sharon.
Completely bamboozled you.
Okay. She'll say something. She will. Everybody okay right now?
All right.
Okay.
So student enrollment is also always a big factor for us. And it's been relatively stable since, so we saw that big increase from 20 to 21. Since then, it's been relatively stable overall. I mean, you can see that actually the high school has grown over the last couple of years. Harwich and elementary school and the middle school are relatively stable, as is Chatham. So Harwich just went down a little, as did the middle school, but not by much. Definitely not by enough for us to start thinking about making significant cuts or savings anywhere. And we're relatively stable, and we expect to be relatively stable into next year. You know, I'm projecting a decrease of maybe 1% throughout the district, so not a huge decrease. And as I mentioned before, despite that, we're still seeing an increase in the needs of those students. I think I just wanted to mention as well, so, you know, one of the things I always look at is, so is the number of students left at grade 12 more or less than the number of students coming in at kindergarten? So the number of students leaving was higher than those coming in this year, but we also picked up, we've seen an increase in students at pre-K that Melissa McGuire spoke about, and also in grade 5 and grade 8, more students coming into the district in those grades, which is also impacting the school choice number, because sometimes they're being school choiced out up until that grade, and then they're coming back to Monomoy because they're realising what a great place it is. So our staffing, we saw a decrease 4 or 5 years ago, and since then it's been relatively level for the last couple of years. We did increase this year. That is driven from two places really. It's driven by ESSER, so that's those federally funded positions, and also additional instructional assistants, and that comes down to special education students and their IEPs, which specify the individual support that they require. We are sticking with our class size goal. And as always, as part of the budget, we have asked the principals and the directors what their needs are for this budget. And we have funded some of those items, and some remain unfunded. So the ones that are funded are the instructional coaches, curriculum leaders, we've discussed for grades 6 through 12, 2 of those. We have added a theatre house manager, partly offset by cobbling together existing stipends. We have some facilities projects which we'll talk about. We're hoping to upgrade the robotics lab at the middle school. We're also this year, I think we've almost completed replacing the wireless access points here at the middle school, here at the high school, and next year we'll be doing it at the middle school. That is partially funded by E-rate, which is federal funding for technology upgrades and advancements. And you heard about earlier, we are hoping to add a 0.5 FTE special education teacher at Chatham. All right. Then,
You know what, Ms. Henderson?
It's just a typo, 6 to 12, right? It should be 5 to 12?
Yes,
Okay.
they should take it.
Just making sure.
Are we, Madam Chair?
Yes,
Are
Ms.
we
Gann.
pausing for
Pardon?
questions? Because I do
We can.
have, unless I've missed it somewhere. What is, where'd it go? What is the number, the investment under the middle school robotics lab computer?
It's like $7,000.
7,000? Okay.
Any other questions right now? Okay.
Thank you. So there are items, as I mentioned, there are some items which are not included in the budget at the moment. One is replacing some of the common area furniture here at the high school. If you look around, you'll see they're fairly dilapidated and in need of repair, if not replacement. Also, there is a request from Harwich Elementary School and Chatham Elementary School for additional interventionists to support math and a reading support in both schools. And there's a potential for need of additional special education teachers at Harwich. But, you know, as we have prioritised the needs for the district, those on the left are the ones we prioritised to include with this version of the budget, and the ones on the right now are not funded. I won't spend much time on this because we've talked about capital quite a lot in the last few meetings. just to say, I have added one item here, which is the replacement of the network switch at the middle school. So when we're replacing all those wireless access points, the IT director, Jim Birchfield, recommended we should also replace that switch. And it's $10,000, and as it's a single item for more than $5,000, that's what makes it capital. And strictly speaking, the carpets and the PA systems are actually extraordinary maintenance. They're not technically capital, if anybody else cares.
Okay.
Ms. Gaines?
Just a quick question. On the,
Yeah.
under the capital,
Yeah.
the district, the facilities pickup truck, is this a new truck or a?
No, we have an
Let's be-
existing truck that is a not road, like it can't be driven right now because it's in such a state of disrepair.
Okay,
So-
so it's a replacement?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of how this intersects with the challenges, if you go to the Harwich dump right now, you'll see, like a big sign that says plow contractors needed. So we've been told by both towns, because in our lease, the Harwich Elementary, Chatham Elementary Middle School, the towns plow those, but both towns are struggling to get plow contractors. So, so having the truck that is capable of plowing puts us in a situation where we hopefully aren't waiting for lots of, like spaces for teachers to get cleared to get, to allow school to happen. So we've needed the truck, but we're also in this interesting times now where there may be even a greater need for the truck than we once had.
Dr. Carpenter, how often are we plowing the property after the town of Harwich or Chatham has plowed the property?
So we always use our trucks to clean up.
To clean up?
So the big equipment come through, but to actually get teachers safely in the parking spaces, we'll go push snow, but there will likely, until there are enough plow contractors to go around for everybody, a greater need.
So we're using it frequently?
What's that?
We use it
Whenever it snows.
frequently?
We use
Yeah.
it,
Plow
Every time it
ourselves?
snows.
So every storm.
Yeah.
Plus it gets used for
Yeah.
all sorts of.
All the other things? Okay,
things.
great, thank you.
No, it's all right. Okay, so I just wanted to talk quickly. This section only has one slide in it. This say about their revenues. So the way the budget works is before we finalize the budget number, we have a number of sources of revenue which help to reduce that overall number. It's almost impossible to see these, the individual items up here on this slide. But that big blue one is our school choice. And this is, you can see how it's been relatively stable for the last 7 or 8 years. The line is actually graphed on the axis on the right, because you can't really get them both in the same chart if you have them in the same axis. And so you can see that in the last couple of years, the total, and that line is the total, and you can see that the line hasn't gone up. And that's because of the ESSER funding. So that's what's driving that increase. So we're using ESSER to offset positions in the budget, to pay for positions that we would not otherwise be able to include in this budget. We're also, there is a possibility, we heard that Title I might be increasing for next year, but we'll remain to see what that award is. Questions?
Ms. Games, sorry, I just
So
don't
I
look that
guess
way.
this might be a good pause.
Yeah,
So with the
please.
change in the governor, I'm just curious if, and I know we don't know yes or no, but do we think there might be some changes in the state's contribution with this change in governor?
So, who knows? So
Okay.
they have the Student Opportunity Act, so I guess there is a framework for them to make a decision, about the Student Opportunity Act, which increased funding in a number of different areas, including special education and low-income students. And there's an opportunity to decelerate or accelerate the the progress towards delivering on the aims of the Student Opportunity Act. So they had decreased it because of COVID, and they're now trying to catch up. So, if the state wanted, they could possibly accelerate that process because it's a multi-year implementation. So, depending on what they think when they look at the budget, and that might be something they choose to do, but I don't know what a first-year governor's going to do, how much they're going to really want to rip up the budget 3 months into the job, I don't know.
Yeah, okay. I had just heard today, I guess that it might be March until we get, is that right?
Yep.
So I was just curious about that, and particularly with mental health, like what funding might come through that lens?
So I think that's a great point. Yeah, so that's a great point. So, I think I was thinking about like the existing framework, so our Chapter 70 funding, which is the primary method with which the state funds education. But in terms of what grants may be available, I think that is a big area where we might see some state initiatives to help offset the impact of ESSER funds being completed at the end of the year.
Okay.
So I think that's a really good question.
So those are areas that are carrying, some of those positions are in the SEL mental health realm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so that was the budget. So basically, actually, this slide. So, I don't know how helpful this is. When I was first trying to work out how this all made sense, this chart helped me. So you have all the expenditure that we're planning, and some of that is paid through circuit breaker, from school choice, and from grants, and what you're left with is the budget. And then the budget is funded by the Harwich and Chatham assessments, and then the general fund revenue and state aid. So there's we kind of separate out revenue, and it's fairly arbitrary, but we have some revenue which is taken into account before the budget's set, and that's the ones I just spoke about. And then general fund revenue and state aid is actually taken into account after the budget is set and is there to reduce the assessments. So before I talk about all that though, the foundation enrollment is one of the critical pieces of calculating the assessment, because a lot of the assessment, even with the new assessment methodology, a lot of the assessment comes down to the number of students who live in Monomoy and Harwich, live in Harwich or Chatham and attend public schools, whether it's Monomoy or not. And those percentages are how we split up a lot of the costs of the district. So as those shift one way or another, that makes a big difference to how much of the budget each town is responsible for. One of the key things, this next slide shows it. So on one of the figures that we use, there's the kind of two parts to the assessment. One is the district calculations that we do based on those numbers, and one is one that the state does when it calculates the minimum contribution of each town. So the state uses this year's enrollment figures, but the district uses the average of the previous 3 years. So we always have a delayed impact of enrollment changes, and we kind of hold on to the impact of enrollment changes for a little longer than we might otherwise have. So that when you saw back from 20 to 22, that kind of big change in enrollment, relatively speaking, and although Harwich saw a big reduction, as a percentage, Chatham saw a bigger reduction. And we're still feeling the impact of that for another year or two, because it's still captured in that 3-year average that we're pulling along with us. So when you look at when we look at this year's numbers and they're relatively level, it doesn't make sense why, as I'm going to show you, Harwich is owning a bigger part of the assessment increase. And it's because of this delayed, it's partly because of this delayed average change in average. So just to recap, we calculated the budget at the start, and the next step is to look at the general fund revenue and state aid. This is where that state revenue comes in, the Chapter 70, excess and deficiency. So for the last few years, we have set our excess and deficiency to are the amount of the excess and deficiency we put towards the budget at $800,000, and we've continued to do that this year. We had talked about reducing it to 600,000, but it's still relatively high. It's the highest it's ever been, so I think we can maybe hold on for another year or two at this level before we start to reduce it. Charter school is the way we get revenue back from the state for the number of students that they leave here to go to charter schools. So the state charges us to help fund charter schools, but then to alleviate the impact of that, they give us a little bit back, which goes down each year. So we're expecting that to continue to go down. Medicaid, I won't go into that, but we're assuming that's level. Then interest. So as the Treasurer spoke about earlier, so that, investing those funds are helping to offset the assessments. So that's what that money's being used for. So we invested those funds wisely, it gives us that interest, and that offsets assessments, so the towns have to pay less. So all the interest we're gaining and we're budgeted is going straight back to the towns because it's helping to reduce their assessments. Miscellaneous revenues for like building use, and then we have a transportation aid, which is the state helps to offset the costs of transportation for regional school districts, and we already know what that amount is because we know it from the state calculations, and you voted it last year. So that just shows you how state has gone up in the last few years. Really, it's driven by Chapter 70 increases. You can see the kind of blue line at the top is our interest increase. And then, so here are the draft assessments. So, I'm just gonna, I actually haven't said it yet, but these numbers will change significantly come March. So, I have tried, I've done my best to estimate. We used to just assume the minimum local contribution wouldn't change year to year until we got the new one. But I have actually used our estimate of the foundation enrollment and plugged that in to the spreadsheet along with, our estimate of how the state funding will change and how that will impact the minimum local contributions. But they do take into account other things like the relative wealth of each town through the property prices and the town income, the overall income of the town, and those numbers just aren't available right now and won't be available until March. So these are better than, I don't know, these are our estimates, that's all. But with these estimates, the way the assessment breaks down is an increase of $1 million, 3.8% for Harwich, and less than $200,000, 1.6% for Chatham. So what won't necessarily, so basically what our budget, so the assessments, you take our budget and it's equal to that general fund revenue plus the Harwich assessment plus the Chatham assessment. Those three numbers is how we pay for our budget. So that's one of the things I always do before I send out my slides, I just check my numbers because those should add up. So if we get more Chapter 70 aid, that will help reduce the total assessment for each town, but it won't necessarily change the split, so they'll fall relatively proportionately. But the minimum local contributions, which are calculated by the state, that can change the split, and that we don't know until March. So one thing I just wanted to point out, so I used to do this in a blue table, and now we're green because it's an alternative, it's the new methodology. The blue table was the old methodology. Oh. And if we were still using the old method, the Harwich assessment, as big as it seems, that $1 million increase, as much as that seems now, it would actually be over $29 million if we were still using the old method. That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So you can see, and that's one thing I'm sure we will stress when we present to the town of Harwich, is that we would be higher if we had not made a change to the assessment. All right. Any questions?
Absolutely, Miss Games. Should have just said it.
I wanted to circle back to what you said. So you said the numbers could change drastically in March. So just to
Yeah.
clarify,
Yes.
let's just assume,
Actually-
so let's just assume that
Actually,
chapter, what?
Nothing?
Oh, let's just assume that chapter, what is that? Let's just, all right, so let's just assume chapter 70 changes, let's just say that.
Yeah.
So, and you said that it would not change, or, so it might shift in Harwich and Chatham. Can you give us an idea? Can you be a bit more practical and tell me what
So,
a shift
Yes.
might look like?
Yeah.
so I think if Chapter 70 alone were to change, I think you might see that percentage in both towns rise proportionately, similarly up or down. What historically, if the numbers are off the estimate here, it's on that minimum required contribution. So, so there's, so we're taking a leap that this estimation of the minimum local contribution on this page is going to be close to what the minimum required contribution that's set by the state. And behind that number, it's enrollment driven. So, so that number's enrollment driven. So, so we kind of know the enrollment factor of it, but there are other variables that are going to go into that. And depending on what that number looks like, that can drive things. And we have historically over the last decade, the longer it takes the governor's number to come out and it to get through the Ways and Means, sometimes we have some surprises as we get close to town meetings. Sometimes they're surprises that are favorable for Harwich. Sometimes there's surprises that are favorable for Chatham. So that's the number I think that gives me a lot of angst, and as we wait for the number to come in. So Chapter 70 alone, but it's that minimum local required contribution that's.
So, yeah. So this chart, I think might help a little bit. So there's a few things that can change. So our total planned expenditure may also change because we will get the final number from our health insurance, and that will impact what our total planned expenditure is. So the total planned expenditure and the budget can then change. And then when you look at this final bar chart number 3, the general fund revenue and state aid may increase if we get more money from Chapter 70. And so what's left to be split between Chatham and Harwich is less. Hopefully, will be less if we get more money from Chapter 70. So then what share of what's left does each town have to pay? And that's where the superintendent's talking about that minimum local contribution can flex that percentage. So Harwich can end up paying a little more or a little less of what's left to be funded by the assessment.
Okay. I'm just thinking through the timelines. So all right, so this is our draft budget, and
Yeah.
then we have to have our final, right? I guess,
March 9th.
I don't have it.
So we have
Yeah.
the final vote scheduled for March 9th.
Okay, March 9th.
So I'm really hoping we get state numbers in that first week in March. But, there is a possibility that it will be pushed out for a couple of weeks, but I don't think so. So historically, that's the meeting time we've historically set for approving the final budget. And, as you know, though, as it's gone through with discussions with the town, we have had subsequent votes as more information becomes available, either from the town or elsewhere.
Okay. Good. Dr. Carpenter?
And I think, to try to preempt Charles, I think in the past, what we have also done is as the budget, so we have, this is how big the budget currently is, and sometimes things track more favorably, and when they have tracked more favorably, we've gone back to the finance subcommittee and discussed, do we go to that slide that has some things that currently haven't been funded and fund some of them because now they can fit within the budget that we are currently, that we're currently talking about. Because it's not that we don't think they would be good, it's just, we're also trying to make sure that this overall budget's going to fit within the fiscal means of the two towns and everything else. So we have had a lot of success over the years of trying to fund some of the things that currently are sort of unfunded. So hopefully, as we get the numbers further, we can pick up some of those, some of the things that haven't, that currently aren't. But at some point, we have to kind of set, here's the maximum that the budget's going to be, and then keep our fingers crossed that some of the other variables come in favorably for the towns. As, Chapter 70 go up, that'll help the towns.
Are there any other questions for Michael on the draft budget?
Just one clarification.
Yeah,
just because
absolutely.
Betty is new, so, and I'm glad you said that. So if we vote this tonight, it can never go higher, correct? But it can go lower? If I'm remembering, do you remember when we have,
So that's, so,
I think you're
I
talking
mean,
about excess.
it's hard for us to persuade you to increase it, but
Yeah.
there is nothing to say it can't increase.
oh, okay, all right.
It's only-
Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that, okay.
Yeah, it's only after the towns have voted and the budget's set, you cannot increase the budget.
Okay, but you
Understandably.
can't up
So
until
even if-
then,
I mean,
okay.
you can, but you have to go back to the towns and everybody has
Right,
to
and
approve
yeah,
it.
everybody has
So
to
that's
Are you
where.
thinking of excess and deficiency, maybe?
And
No,
that's
there
where-
was something I
No,
was
it's-
seeing.
It's that,
It's that?
once the
Okay.
towns,
Yeah.
once the
Yeah.
towns
And
vote.
Yeah.
it became really germane during the COVID, because
Yeah.
remember, we had a 12th year, we had a
Yeah.
a
5 different
1/12
versions?
budget because
Yeah.
town meetings hadn't taken place yet, and so we were entering the new financial year without an approved budget, and the state set it for us, and there was a whole conversation about how you set that in such a way that you're not stuck with too low an amount, because you still want to be able to increase it. Well, then, because it was 1/12 based on the previous year, so
Yeah.
it got up, so.
Yep.
it was
So, 2
complicated.
years ago.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
So
Ms.
just before-
Henderson. Do you have a question? Well, actually, before we move forward with the vote, I just wanted to do a quick reminder that we have our budget workshop, and it will be recorded on January 19th from 6 to 8 here in the high school library. And then also a reminder, in our meeting on February 2nd is the budget hearing, which we hold here. That will be at 6 o'clock, and then our regular meeting will start at 7 o'clock. So there'll be plenty more to review. And then this draft budget, if approved this evening, will go to the towns for January 15th. So yes, at this time, I would like a motion.
Here you go. Here's one here.
Oh, look, there's a motion. Ms. Henderson.
Two separate?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. That's what we've done in the past.
Yeah.
one for the-
So I would like to make a motion to approve the draft FY '24 budget of $44,323,116.
I would second that.
I'm going to do a roll call. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. And I would entertain a motion for the second. Ms. Henderson?
I would like to make a motion to approve a draft FY '24 assessment for the town of Harwich of $28,392,920.
392,000.
$392,920. And a draft FY '24 assessment for the town of Chatham of $9,973,000. I didn't say it right.
Point of clarification, $9,670,973 is what you meant?
Yep, that's what I meant.
I'd
Perfect.
second that.
All right, Mr. Russell, thank you, and I'll do a roll call. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. I just want to verify, we had $44,323,116 on the first motion? Thank you.
Maybe it was covered in the Chatham curriculum, but not the
Great,
Harwich
it's
curriculum.
okay. We're all,
Thank you
Very
very much.
possible.
thank you, Michael, very much. Again, wonderful draft. Can't wait to see you soon. Next item on the agenda is the first reading of policy file DFA investment policy. And your chair is, do you know who's
Chair is
presenting that
Sharon.
tonight?
Sharon
And your
is our
chair,
chair.
oh, your chair, okay,
Yes.
Sharon.
Yes, I don't have that in front of me, but basically Michael presented some of that tonight, and so did the treasurer.
Sharon, it's in your packet.
Yeah, but I didn't get the packet.
We emailed your packet on Tuesday.
I said that there was a problem with it. If someone else...
Tina, do you want to do it?
Yeah.
All right, Ms. Gaines will do it, Sharon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So in your packet, the investment policy file DFA, which Michael has spoken about, as well as our treasurer, who spoke earlier about it. And this is a brand-new policy, which is why it's all in red. And Michael came and gave us a wonderful presentation of policy subcommittee, and kind of just outlined what the treasurer is now doing.
Yes.
And Michael, you can add anything, but just kind of outlines where the treasurer going forward is going to be looking to invest some of our money so that we get a more return that we can later use, for budgets and things like that.
So there's a lot of law around this, as you can imagine, about what public funds can be invested in. And so I think, so that's why, but we wanted a policy as well, just to make sure you were all aware of what was happening and that we had, it was being done in accord with your intentions. But it's, the law really sets what we can and cannot invest in. And it's really restricted to, like state or federal sponsored financial tools like treasury bonds. It's not like Paul's going out and playing the stocks and shares in the market. So he's not doing that. These are kind of long-term, really low-risk investments. And there's just two additional things in there. One really it's about reporting. So the treasurer will inform the finance committee of any significant changes to the investments. And I also include in my quarterly report an update on where our investments are, just so you have that information on a regular basis.
I just have one question. Where was it pulled from? It's from another district, or it's a policy we just didn't have? I'm assuming it's a policy we didn't have because it's all around.
So there are not many districts that have this policy that we tried, and we tried on a couple, and this was an amalgamation of those.
Okay. That's kind of what I wanted to know. Great, thank you. Any other questions for the policy subcommittee on this policy? All right, moving on, we'll move on to the harassment of students. Policy file JICK.
Yes, Melissa McGuire is going to speak on that.
Great, thank you, Sharon.
Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services. Really briefly, so what's happening is there's a change in the policy identification, so we're terminating one policy. We've created a new policy, but this policy has some additions regarding harassment. Our previous policy did not. It now includes staff as part of the harassment towards students. So it used to be student-to-student harassment, so now it's just harassment of students. It includes students. It further defines the locations for which we are responsible for monitoring that. It includes the potential consequences for it, and it also further defines the investigation that requires. So there was a little bit more that was put into it.
Thank you, Melissa. Questions? Point of clarification? Anything? Discussion? Everybody good? All right. Great, and those will come back at our next meeting for,
Madam
Ms.
Chair,
Gaines?
I believe on the agenda, so we're going to vote tonight, I believe, to discontinue one of these, and then the fresh red one is going to come back for a second read. Is that what, yeah. So we're just going to vote tonight to remove this one. And then
Yeah, that was the next item. Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to do that now, or?
Yep, I just didn't know if anyone had any more questions on
okay,
harassment of
sorry.
students.
Okay.
We're good with that, which is going to be replacing this file JBA. So there's a vote for discontinuation of policy file JBA. Is there a motion?
Motion. My move to replace file JBA, student-to-student harassment, with the one we just spoke about, Melissa spoke about, replaced with J-I-C-K.
Harassment of students, okay. And the second? Okay, great. And roll call, Sharon?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Great, thank you, guys. Next item is subcommittee representatives and liaison reports. Betty, you just want to report out on the finance that we met this week, or I'm happy to do it this time around if you want.
The Finance Subcommittee met this week, and we discussed the budget that was presented tonight and voted to bring it, as Dr. Carpenter already mentioned, and that was it.
And we reviewed it just like we did tonight.
We did.
So, and I don't know when our next finance subcommittee meeting is listed online. I had it written down on my other calendar, but nothing in front of me. But we do have another one coming up soon. Great, thank you. And then next item is the superintendent's report.
Porch for the Graduate Development Team met last night. A number of us here in the room were part of those conversations. We have been largely, for the last couple meetings, had three little work groups, all sort of honing in on the skill sets and mindsets that we would really want to see students who move through our system towards graduation develop over the time here. We were sharing out the work of the three groups last night. There's a lot of commonality between what we were seeing there, and we'll be meeting again next Wednesday to hopefully bring those three bodies of work together into one cohesive set of skill sets and mindsets, and ultimately have that move forward with some theming and some graphic design to bring back to the committee here in the next month.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to add to that.
Excuse me?
Absolutely.
I'd like to add just a little to that.
Yeah.
So, I've been at all of these meetings, but I think last night I might have been the only school committee person there. We've had groups as large as you might know, maybe 60 people or 45. Last night it was only 13, but it was a very dedicated, lively group, and students were 1/3 of that. And we've been really taken with how involved and what a meaningful contribution that they've made to that. So I want to say that while these students are here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sharon. All right. And we've had the presentation of the warrants, and I will welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
In a second?
Second?
Second from Betty? All right, and roll call, Sharon?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Great. 9:34.
Thank you.